think it's Oxford, right? So I was very interested. I was always very interested in the subject that I studied, PPE, in particular on economics, mostly because I felt that that was the strongest lever we can pull in our society, and it kind of is reflected in the work that I do today, which is to say that we think that public policy change, good public policy, evidence-based, can really dramatically improve lives for lots and lots of people. And vice versa, it can also be incredibly damaging, bad policy. So I really wanted to apply to Oxford to study it's the birthplace of PPE, and it was, and I still believe, the best place to study PPE. So yeah, it was really actually the subject area that motivated the application to Oxford. I think there are very many, but I think a lot of my favorite memories come back down to actually the time spent rowing with my friends at our college boat club. We weren't very good. I'm about a foot too short to be a proper rower, really, but we tried very hard, and I think that I always enjoyed that. That we didn't try to pretend that we wanted to be good. We weren't okay with losing, right? And we were very competitive people, and as I said, that put us in the end sort of bang average. And I was perfectly happy with that. It was the process of sort of having 8 other good friends, trying very hard to work towards a common objective together, and that was really good fun. And lots of times getting off the boat, completely frozen in winter, where but those are definitely my favorite memories. And the thing I miss the most is having the time to sort of explore things, ideas, academics, and explore in a lot of detail. I think that's the thing that I really miss. I think once you leave Oxford, life moves, I think, significantly faster, but in a sort of different way, right? I think in Oxford things are very intense for the 8 weeks during term time, but I always felt like I had the opportunity to, if we're writing an essay for the week, sure, we had a pretty heavy workload, but it was balanced, I think, just right, where you could really let yourself go deep dive into a particular topic of interest. I think that's probably what I miss the most. I think in the real world, quote unquote, after, you don't get to spend as much time on things as you like, I think. Yeah, I think it definitely has. I think it gave me the time to explore my interests. I think the format of the tutorials are fantastic for that purpose. I think it allowed me to sort of find my feet, find my friends. I think, reality is that there are a lot of different types of people at Oxford, right? As I'm sure, alumni listening to this will sort of wholeheartedly agree, in the sense that, I think it's really a time where you can find your crowd, right? And most people at Oxford are just sort of nerds in their area, and that's my crowd. Yeah, I think it's changed me in that way. In terms of my current career, in terms of what I'm working on at Greater Change, I think it's definitely inspired some of our strategy, some of our outlook, because again, of just how we think about the world. How I see homelessness as something that has a huge negative externality to the social fabric. It's obviously, first and foremost, a really damaging experience for the individual experiencing it. But it also carries with it something quite, I think, corrosive to our society. And I think the way I sort of put that into words, into what that means in terms of externalities to the public, I think definitely has been affected by academic studies there. But I think in a different way, it was also, I think it also affected how I viewed things, because, Oxford City has one of the worst homelessness issues in the UK. And it's a wealthy city. and I think that really sort of changed my perspective when I started working, volunteering in the sector in homelessness in Oxford, where the same streets, quite literally looked completely different to someone rough sleeping, versus a student. So the same corner that I had a particular memory, on Broad Street, right, just around the corner from Exeter where I went, um, it's a completely different experience to someone else, and there is a lot of wealth behind those walls, and I think that's kind of, also I think had a very strong sort of emotional impact for me. I think on sort of I uh, how I think about what's fair. I think it's a whole spectrum, right? It's the wishy-washy answer. um, I think it's something where you try to run some kind of somewhat commercial activity and then turn that into some social good. But then when you sort of dive into that in a little bit more detail, you realize that that definition needs more refinement, in the sense that, you can have on one end of the spectrum a company like Patagonia, where you would probably call it a social enterprise. I mean, it's a B Corp, and it's obviously very, very sort of impact-driven commercial organization. But really, at the end of the day, it's a company with a sort of environmental mission tagged onto it. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you get something closer to what Greater Change does, which is really, it's very, very close to a charity, really. And in fact, we have a charity entity as a sister entity to what we do, where the work is the impact, right? So the way we support people with financial planning support, and we do the cash grants management, where we sort of distribute cash grants via our charity partners to people experiencing homelessness. That work itself fundamentally has impact, right? Whereas selling a vest, like Patagonia does, like lots of other clothing companies do, doesn't fundamentally have an impact. They just tag something onto that. So it's a real sort of, I think, a whole spectrum of different things that you can do. But I think the underlying sort of denominator across all of it is to recognize that we're trying to voluntarily internalize some externality, right? And what I mean by that is to say, we're trying to say that, when you release carbon into the atmosphere in course of doing business, there's an externality to the rest of the world that we're not paying the price for, but we are going to voluntarily bring that price into our business model and account for it in some way. That's just one example, right? And in our case at Greater Change, I think the example there really is to say that, homelessness is something that is, as I said, very, very damaging for the social fabric, very damaging for the individual. Now, the issue we're dealing with here is that it's the person that we're helping generally doesn't have the buying power to sort of overcome financial barriers on the pathway out of homelessness. They don't have the buying power for the product. So what I see us providing is essentially a public good. It's no different than, a construction company building a road, right? And yeah, there is a positive externality to this public good that we should try very hard to reach as many people as we can. But that's again a different end of the spectrum, isn't it? Because we basically are a charity with some sort of trading activities rather than the other way around. But so hopefully that gives you some idea and the range of what counts as a social enterprise. So Greater Change was something that I started in 2017 with my co-founder Alex, as I mentioned, who was at Jesus studying E&M in the same year as I was. And we were inspired by a couple of things, really. We were working and sort of volunteering at a local charity called Aspire in Oxford. And as you do when you first start getting into the sector, you ask some pretty naive questions about homelessness. You say, okay, the UK is the sixth wealthiest country in the world. Why does homelessness exist to the extent that it does? And as you dig deeper into it as well, you realize that rough sleeping is really just the tip of the iceberg. There are 300,000 people, is estimated, experiencing homelessness in the UK today in any given day. and only 10,000 are rough sleeping. So of course, as we see rough sleeping spiral, actually there's a hidden problem that is spiraling even worse, right? And there are 250,000 people in temporary accommodation. So why is that the case? As the name implies, it should be a 6 to 12 month stepping stone, right? People should move on quite quickly afterwards. And the answers that we got back when you asked the question why is you get some pretty varied answers. So some people will say, okay, it's rent deposit and first month's rent. I found a place that I can afford monthly, but I can't put together that lump sum upfront. Maybe they've won the jackpot, they've been assigned social housing, but it's completely bare. The flooring's been ripped out, so they need to put things back in. There's no fridge freezer, there's no washer dryer, which is a classic example of a poverty tax, right? If you don't have a washer dryer, you go to a laundromat and you end up paying more money for your laundry very, very, very quickly. So what we do is we provide people with these sort of one-off cash grants to help them overcome these barriers. And, it was inspired a lot by a very sort of evidence-based cash transfers charity called Give Directly. They're based in the US. And they primarily started working in Kenya, and now sort of slowly expanded to lots of different parts of the world. And they've released over 300 million USD in cash grants. And when Alex and I kind of saw that in 2017, 2018, we kind of said, well, there's no reason to think it wouldn't work just as well as a model if you transferred it to the UK, right? Addressing relative poverty instead of absolute poverty. So that's what we did. We started by helping 16 people in 2018 by providing them with cash grants. And the whole idea there was just to say, let's just help the first batch of people, see how well it goes. And if it goes well, we'll keep growing it. If it doesn't, that's no big deal. We'll just sort of get some learnings out of it, shut it down, move on. Happily, it's gone very well. To date, we've supported over 750 people so far. So last year, our impact report found that 86% of the people we supported sustained stable housing 12 months on. We know that almost half of them then make it into gainful employment as well. We know that this is a massive impact on their mental, physical health, on substance use where relevant, ex-offending, re-offending where relevant, right? So we just realized that this is actually a very, very effective model for unlocking move on. And so that's what Greater Change does. And what we're trying to do is to try to grow the work and ultimately to, I think, affect public policy and make ourselves redundant, right? That's the dream, to end homelessness. I think it is possible, it is within reach. I think the motivation for me personally is that sometimes homelessness can feel like something that, the crisis makes you feel helpless in a very ironic way, right? Like you walk past and you step over people rough sleeping, and you don't stop to help, really. Most of us don't. And it's not a statement of judgment, it's a statement of fact, right? In London, you have to do that. Otherwise, you never get where you're trying to go to. But I think there's something really toxic about that. Like it sort of makes you turn off your empathy as you go around. And it makes you feel, well, okay, I can stop and talk to someone, I can buy them a sandwich, but deep down, we kind of know that that isn't going to fundamentally change their lives. I think that's why we stopped doing it, right? Because it's kind of like, well, what can I do? And happily, I think what we're doing at Greater Change is say, well, this is what you can do. This is a very, very effective way to move people out of homelessness. Just give them cash. Just give them access to a personalized budget that we sort of manage with their key worker and allow them to spend as they wish, essentially, to help them move out of homelessness with some, safeguards. I'll share two stories. I'll share one where it worked really well and one where it didn't. So the first case study was a guy we were helping in Oxford, where he was illegally trained by his employer to be a forklift driver. And his employer went bust during lockdown. So he couldn't get another job because even though he was a skilled forklift driver, he didn't have an official license. So what we did was we got him some skills courses, we got him some basic course, official lessons, got him the certificate. And off he went, he found another job quite quickly. And that sort of was quite a happy, simple case. And I think in many ways it highlights the importance of the flexibility, because it basically, shows that, the magic is in not prescribing ahead of time what we think is good for the person, but rather asking them what barriers they were facing and funding the grants in that manner, right? So I think that's, again, I think very importantly highlights what we've done. I think another example, though, highlighting the limitation of our theory of change, is a man who was quite a prominent rough sleeper in Oxford in the 2010s. He was quite entrenched. We raised, I think, around 1.2 thousand pounds for him to try to get him a deposit and move on. But really, it wasn't really going anywhere. And in some ways, it shows the safeguards working, right? Because his support worker basically told us not to release the cash at the time. He had asked us if he could spend the money on a houseboat where he would go live with his friend, and it was kind of a really dodgy boat. It wasn't a great situation, you know what I mean? And he wasn't in a great place. He had suffered a lot of personal tragedy as well, and that really complicated things, and that really worsened his substance use disorder as well. So there were a lot of things happening in his life, and it didn't really work. And we found after about 2 years actually of repeatedly trying, so we bought him some winter clothes, and that sort of helped tide him over. But it wasn't that big step change that we were looking for. In the end, it's a happy ending, because in the end he did get support out of homelessness through a Housing First project. I'm very happy to talk about Housing First with anyone who's interested, but I'd rather not go on a tangent now. But suffice to say that he was provided unconditional housing by a project in Oxford, and now he's sort of living quite happily. He's much better in terms of his recovery. But we didn't really make the difference there, and I think it really sort of highlights the fact that for us, when you say we want to end homelessness, there's a pretty simple formula, right? There are 3 things that are required. The first is housing supply. So is there somewhere suitable to place people? The second pillar is, health and social care. And that's simple. I think health and social care, with NHS and social care programs, I think they're way beyond capacity. And I think in many ways they're past broken now, and it's like any machine, when you stuff it, with too many things, it stops working properly. The third pillar is financial resilience, and that's where we act. So I think sort of when the other 2 pillars are already in place, we can make a real difference in unlocking move on. The corollary of that is that very often, when you just have the financial resilience element, perhaps you can buy your way into the other 2 pillars. But what really tends to happen is that doesn't work out very well. So there are a couple of things I can say that about the theory of change. But hopefully those sort of 2 case studies going to highlight a little bit about sort of the benefits and the potential as well as the limitations of the work. There's a huge ambition. So we've supported over 750 people so far, as I said. So what we want to do going forward is in the next 2 years, we want to support another 1,000 people. Beyond that, in the next 5 to 10 years, we want to help as quickly as we can. We want to hit 10, 20, 30, 40,000 people supported. And I think along the way, what that will mean is, we already have evidence that it works, right? What we need to do next is prove that it's scalable and it's practical. And then beyond that, for us, the lever that we're trying to pull that will allow us to help the 300,000 people and more, because, the cost of living crisis, as many people will be familiar with, the Office for National Statistics latest stat shows that 42% of households in Britain have fewer than 3 months savings, which is a very scary thought, I think. It shows you how many people are on a brink. Anyway, so we think that public policy lever is the one that we ultimately really want to pull, to say that, if the government is able to fuel and provide this sort of program, then, that really is the end game. That really is ultimately the goal. And so, we'll help 1,000 people in the next 2 years, help tens of thousands in the next 5 to 10 years. And then along the way, the idea is to try to make ourselves redundant by affecting public policy. And so, yes, if any of the alumni listening to this can support us in that journey, we would love to have a chat. I think one of the things about homelessness in the UK is that it's a very stereotyped issue. So in terms of very practical ways of working with us, if you want to bring us into your workplace to do a lunch and learn session, could be as simple as that as a starting point. Come get in touch with us. If you understand PR and public policy and campaigning, again, we'd love to get in touch. And if you work for the press, we'll love to sort of work with you on that one. I think my biggest tip is not to big up that barrier in your mind. I think most of what stops people is completely mental. Like, it's just a mental barrier. Actually, there are fantastic programs out there nowadays. Lots of sort of incubators, accelerators for social enterprises. There are lots and lots of programs for people trying to make a career switch into these areas, right? That are like really, really well, it really isn't a kind of off the beaten track kind of thing where you have to work really hard to sort of hack your way through the jungle. It's actually a pretty well paved path nowadays. You just have to go do a simple Google search to look for it. So if that's what you want to do, I would say don't think of it as this great big unknown. It's not. Just do a simple Google search and start from there. And I promise you, the path will appear. It will just show up because it's a well-developed space nowadays. Yeah, I'm very, very proud of what we've been able to do at Greater Change. We're a very small team, and we've changed over, as I said, over 700 lives. And I think that's a significant achievement. I think I'm very proud that we stuck very strongly and clearly to our evidence-led model. We have done some very high-quality research. I'm proud of all of that. I think at the end of the day, it comes back down to the fact that yeah, there are sort of 700 plus people out of homelessness today that, if not for us, I think I can really say, they probably would still be stuck in temporary accommodation somewhere. I mean, we've seen some real horror stories, people stuck in temporary accommodation hostels for years and years and years. There was a case in Blackpool, 13 years in and out of TA, you know. So yeah, I'm very, very proud of that. I'm very grateful for the support we get from Oxford University Innovation as well on that, and Pippa and Sarah in particular, got to shout them out. So yeah, I think it has potential. It's probably my one word. It has a lot of potential. There's a lot of potential to do good. I think it has a lot of potential in the ideas and the people that it has, the resources that it has access to. Yeah,